Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dan Burritt. Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, has died. He served one term in the White House, buffeted by economic woes, the Iran hostage crisis, and kept it with a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. He also had special praise for Canada and our role in rescuing American hostages in Iran. What are your memories of Jimmy Carter, and what legacy does he leave? In our second half hour, it is approaching a new year. Do you have any goals for 2025? What are they, and how do you plan to reach them? Dan Burritt here, in for Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. And thank you for joining us on radio, television, and on our live stream. You can call us now on our top story. What are your memories of former U.S. President Jimmy Carter? What legacy does he leave behind? Give us a call now. Our number is 604-669-3733 in Metro Vancouver. Across the province, our number 1-800-825-5950 or pound 690. If you're driving, please make sure that you are hands-free or pulled over, or you can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. As we mentioned, former U.S. President Jimmy Carter has died. The family of the 39th president says he died peacefully, surrounded by loved ones on Sunday. He was 100 years old, the oldest living former president. Here's the CBC's Lindsay Duncombe with just some of the highlights from a long life.
In Jimmy Carter, the United States elected an outsider, plain-spoken, humble, religious.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
The promise of his presidency a contrast to the scandal of the Nixon White House.
Let us create together a new national spirit of unity and trust.
Carter grew up on a peanut farm in rural Georgia. He served in the Navy before returning home to expand the family business. A Southern Democrat, as governor, he promoted civil rights and education. Carter aimed to achieve a competent and compassionate government, but his achievements were often overshadowed by a world in turmoil and a suffering economy. Carter embraced the role of peacemaker and focused his attention on the Middle East. The deal between Israel and Egypt, known as the Camp David Accords, solidified Carter's reputation as a statesman. It led to a Nobel Peace Prize. But it was the conflict with Iran that many say defined his presidency. In 1979, Islamic extremists overthrew the American-backed Shah. Iranian students took over the U.S. Embassy. 52 Americans were held hostage for more than a year. Carter ordered a high-risk rescue. It failed. 8 American servicemen were killed in a helicopter crash. The conflict with Iran led to a gas shortage, long lines and panic at the pump when Americans could least afford it. Inflation soared while wages stagnated.
It is a crisis of confidence.
In what's known as his malaise speech in 1979, Carter urged Americans to reduce consumption. He criticized self-indulgence and consumerism. It didn't go over well, especially in contrast to the telegenic Hollywood optimism of the man campaigning for Carter's job. Ronald Reagan would defeat Carter in 1980. Unpopular and just 56, Carter at first struggled with the adjustment to post-presidential life. But in the decades that followed, his public service would outshine his presidency. In 1982, he opened the Carter Center, devoted to peace and human rights. He and his wife Rosalind helped build homes all over the world through Habitat for Humanity. He authored dozens of books, including a fly fishing guide and a novel. His 2006 book, which compared Israeli actions in Gaza and the West Bank with South African apartheid, drew sharp criticism from fellow Democrats. He spoke to CBC about the controversy.
The word apartheid is provocative, but I don't look on the word provocative as negative.
In 2015, a devastating diagnosis. Carter had metastatic melanoma spread to his brain. A new drug regime put him in remission, and Carter continued to work into his 90s, traveling, building, preaching, living up to the title of his autobiography, A Good Life. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Washington.
Tributes are pouring in from across the world. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called Jimmy Carter a dear friend of Canada, saying that the world lost a great leader and statesman, and that We join our American neighbors to mourn a former president and a lifelong humanitarian whose selfless service will continue to inspire others to make the world a better place. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden spoke about Carter yesterday.
What I find extraordinary about Jimmy Carter, though, is that millions of people all around the world, all over the world, feel they lost a friend as well, even though they never met him. And that's because Jimmy Carter lived a life measured not by words, but by his deeds.
Current U.S. President Joe Biden speaking about Jimmy Carter. Joining us now for more is Arthur Milnes, journalist, historian, and author of 98 Reasons to Thank Jimmy Carter. We're just waiting to get connected with him. He will join us in just a moment. But as we said, we would love to hear from you. If you grew up in the era where Jimmy Carter was president, what do you remember most about that time? Perhaps it was his work in office. Perhaps it was out of office. Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950. That's our number in Metro Vancouver. Pound 690. That's across the province. Pound 690 is our number on your cell phone. Please be pulled over or hands-free when you do that. You can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. And our number in Metro Vancouver is 604-669-3733. Once again, 604-669-3733. We are checking in to make sure our guest can join us in just a moment. And it looks like we have him now. Arthur Milnes is a journalist and author and wrote among them a number of, or at least one book about Jimmy Carter. He's the editor of Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, a Canadian tribute. We appreciate your time, Arthur. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, anytime. I appreciate you taking time out to honor President Carter Den.
Arthur, first of all, what went through your mind when you heard the former president had died?
Well, I was sad because, I'd lost a friend, but he's 100 years old. And when I considered, within moments, I considered the remarkable legacy that James Earl Carter of Plains, Georgia has left in his wake. Wasn't so sad anymore. And he and Mrs. Carter literally touched millions and millions of lives throughout the world. And with their legacy, they will continue to do so for generations to come. And I'm just lucky mine was one of those lives that they touched.
Now, Carter's life, as we've said, spans a huge swath of time, 100 years. Let's start when you first remember seeing him and perhaps just understanding his role in the world.
Well, my interest in him starts when he is president, and I'm only 12 years old or so. And it started around the family dinner table because my mother in particular, Mom never spoke about politics, but there was one exception. And Mom always said the same thing. And she would say, Art, Jimmy Carter is a good and decent man. And then she added a few times something that really stuck with me. And still does today, is she said when President Carter was in the White House, that was the only time in her life during the Cold War that she felt safe, knowing that it was Jimmy Carter's finger on the West's nuclear button. And also as well, my mom had worked as a young nurse in psychiatric wards, and Mrs. Carter's championing of mental health and lifting stigma and for better conditions for those who had to seek hospital treatment. That stuck home that really hit home for my mother too. So she admired both of them, and that really was passed on to me.
And before we get into more of his work, I'd like to touch on that partnership. The former president said, if I'm quoting this right, and you'll know better than me, that meeting and marrying and being linked with Rosalind was the pinnacle, like his greatest achievement. That's what made him.
100%. And they were married 77 years. But also, folks forget that it was Jimmy's mother who delivered Rosalind, right? And she was the town nurse, and Plains, Georgia is only 600 people. And a few days after Mrs. Smith, Rosalind's mom, had given birth, Jimmy's mother came over to check on her patient and the new baby, and she brought her toddler son with her. a young son named Jimmy. So quite literally, they knew each other their entire lives, and it was always hard to tell. And when you study them, you see this where Jimmy Carter started and Rosalind Carter ended, or vice versa. They were the first true political couple of equals, and she would say the same thing, that she married Jimmy Carter, this young naval officer, and the adventures continued the rest of their lives. And they put their eye on the ball, and they both decided at very young ages that they were going to make a difference in the world. And till the day they died, and as I said, their legacies will continue for generations to come. The good works and the millions of lives they've touched, the lives they've saved through combating and winning the war against guinea worm disease in the developing world, fighting river blindness, releasing political prisoners, fighting the death penalty at every chance, and they'll live on and on.
We have a call now. Mohammed is joining us from Langford. Mohammed, thanks for calling. What are your memories of Jimmy Carter?
Well, hello and thank you. To me, he was an absolute and true statesman. He was not a politician who was polished and refined. He was there to do a job to help people, and not just Americans, to help people throughout the world. And after he left his presidency, he was an even more true statesman in all the things that he did for so many organizations and so many people. He was absolutely a beautiful and lovely person. And I think unlike the trash that we deal with in America and throughout many parts of the world these days, he is a true statesman and leader.
Is there a particular accomplishment that stands out in your mind, Mohammed?
From his presidency, I would say no, but it was post-presidency, his work with Habitat for Humanity. I mean, he was not afraid to put his hands into a mud pile or do physical labor or do anything. Like, he was not a person, this is not dirty work for me, I can't do it. He put his hands into everything, and he was there 100% with his heart.
We appreciate your call, Mohammed. Thank you very much for joining us. Arthur Milnes, what do you make of what you heard from Mohammed?
Well, I was thinking as I listened to Mohammed, how Carter's vice president, Walter Mondale, Mr. Mondale, Vice President Mondale, was a great Democratic politician from the party. He knew everything about how to get deals and everything in politics, whereas Carter didn't have that experience in Washington. So anyway, Mondale always said that the way to get Jimmy Carter to lose an argument with Jimmy Carter was to tell him it was politically good for him to do something. And Carter didn't care. Carter always tried to put the issue and what he could do best. That's what he would choose. And it drove his political advisors crazy. And politics was the manner which he chose to achieve great things. And he got to the American White House, and he was going to make the most of it every single day. And that would be his downfall in many ways, was not doing things that were political, but instead doing the right thing. Boy, could we use someone like him in office today.
Maurice is joining us from Vancouver. Maurice, what are your memories of Jimmy Carter?
The Iran hostage crisis. I spoke with Ambassador Taylor in Edmonton. I think after he was interviewed on the CBC radio show, the afternoon show with Vicky Gabbro and Gail Helmick, and I just managed to call in and I got connected to him. So it was kind of like a brief conversation. I mean, I had asked him, like, what languages do they speak there? I mean, it wasn't much of a question. And he told me, well, they speak Farsi, and I guess that's about it. But just just talking to him, it's very different.
Mm-hmm. Maurice, we appreciate your call. That has been, when we read the obituaries, and there are many, and you look back, Arthur Milnes, on the legacies and high points, low points, challenges of the Carter presidency. Certainly the Iran hostage crisis is right up there. But he also had great praise for Canada, for Ambassador Ken Taylor, and his work with then Prime Minister Joe Clark, and Canada's role in rescuing hostages.
But back in 2011, I was quite honored that President Carter personally launched my book down at his own historic site in Plains. And there were about 100 Canadians came along down to Plains with me for the ceremony. And during his speech that day, President Carter spoke about what he called the Canadian caper. And he grew emotional in thanking this group of Canadians. And it's the only time in all the years I knew President Carter that I saw him lose his composure. And right in front of us all, President Carter, who again called that the greatest moment in his presidency, when he got the call and the CIA and the Canadians had smuggled those six diplomats of his to safety and out of Iran. And he teared up and cried. And there was everybody there, myself included, many of us started to tear up too, to see this man, this special man who had held the highest, most important office in the world. And here he was teared up, thanking Canada and our country for what we had done to help him. It's a very powerful moment. And everybody will remember the movie Argo.
Yes.
And President Carter, ahead of coming up here to Kingston, Ontario, he made a point of going to see Argo at the theater. And he walked away all ticked off. And he was so mad, he phoned Ben Affleck. And he said, Ben, you're giving 100% of the credit to the CIA and the Americans, but hey, those Canadians, we couldn't have done this without them. So pretty hard to say no to Jimmy Carter. So Ben Affleck had to put on a new ending at the end of the movie. And it was an interview with a man that Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter always called their greatest hero, which was Ambassador Ken Taylor. And he and his wife, Ambassador and Mrs. Taylor, they put their lives at risk to save those 6 Americans. And I still find it unbelievable today that that other countries turned those 6 away, but Canada stood proud for its friend and neighbor when it really, really mattered. And Prime Minister Joe Clark deserves a great deal of credit as well. And this was a huge risk that Prime Minister Clark and his government, both politically, but also the danger to this staff at the Department of External Affairs who were in Tehran. But when push came to shove, Canada was there. And Jimmy Carter never forgot that.
Former Prime Minister Joe Clark, in fact, issued a statement. We have part of that we want to read. He says, the real power of the United States is its founding commitment to the self-evident truths that all are created equal, endowed with certain inalienable rights, perhaps. This is a high standard, often breached, but it is unquestionably the legacy of President Carter, former part of the statement from former Prime Minister Joe Clark, saying he was privileged to work closely with President Carter, both when we led national governments, including the Canadian rescue of American hostages in Iran, and later when we worked together in several international missions in Africa, the Americas, and the Caribbean through the extraordinary Carter Center, which he and Rosalind Carter founded and led. I want to get to a little bit more of that with our guest, Arthur Milnes, but I want to get to a call. Brian in Dawson Creek is with us. Brian, what are your memories of Jimmy Carter?
Well, I was actually only 16 when he first was in his election where he became president. And I still remember it as the only election that I ever really paid attention to because At 16, it wasn't really following politics, but, the United States was in a bad way after the end of the Vietnam War and then Nixon Watergate. And I was just wondering if your guest could comment on that election year, because that was where the excitement of Jimmy started, after he beat Gerald Ford, who was never actually elected at all. He was appointed by Nixon. So
yes.
I was just wondering, I'll just ask that question and listen to your guest. Thank you.
Thanks for your call, Brian. Arthur?
Brian, what a great question, because you've hit on something that not a lot of people will be commenting on in the aftermath of President Carter's death, which is raw political skill. That 1976 election campaign, but more importantly, what preceded it, how President Carter got that nomination. Here was a Southern governor, not very known. He had some nationwide contacts and exposure, but not much. And literally, Brian, future President and Mrs. Carter got into separate station wagons every Monday, and they drove to various states and to sew up delegates. And one of the amazing things, Mrs. Carter used to walk into small towns all through Iowa and New Hampshire, places we all know. And she would go to the local newspaper on Main Street, and she'd walk in and say, "Hi, can I speak to a reporter?" And they would say, "What do you want? Why do you want to speak to a reporter?" And she would say in that Georgia accent, that my husband's going to be president. And they would say, "Of what?" And she would say, "President of the United States." And it was so far-fetched that they would interview her, and she'd end up on the front page. And also,
Arthur, forgive me. We have to jump to a break right now. We so appreciate your time and your expertise. Thank you for joining us today. Arthur Milnes, journalist, historian, and author of 98 Reasons to Thank Jimmy Carter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, no, my thanks to you.
It is 12:28. This is BC Today. We have less than 2 days before we wrap up CBC BC's Make the Season Kind fundraiser. And this morning, we hit another milestone. Today, we passed $2.2 million. We thank you, everybody, for your donations, big, small, everything in between. And there's still time to donate as we hit the home stretch of this fundraiser. Our online donation site closes at midnight tomorrow, Tuesday, December 31st. You can go to cbc.ca/kindbc. You will receive a tax receipt by email within hours of donating. Once again, go to cbc.ca/kindbc. You can designate which of the 110 food banks in BC you would like to donate to. And if you're not sure, there's an option to send your donation to the food bank in greatest need. This is BC Today on CBC. We're on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, as well as on YouTube and the CBC News app. Coming up in our second half hour, a new year can mean new dreams, new hopes, a new you. Do you have any goals for 2025? And if so, how do you plan to achieve them? We'll speak with a life coach and get some advice. That's after the CBC News break with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Police in northern BC are dealing with a suspicious death after a man was found dead outside the community of Mackenzie. RCMP responded to a call Saturday morning about a man lying on the edge of the roadway near Litnett Creek Bridge. The victim's name has not been released, and there's no word on arrests or a possible motive. A man has been charged with allegedly assaulting a nurse at Eagle Ridge Hospital in Port Moody. Police have released few details, but say the nurse was left with serious injuries when she was attacked last month. A charge of assault causing bodily harm has been approved against a 41-year-old man with no fixed address. And Rogers Communications has announced improved wireless coverage along a stretch of Highway 16. The company says 5 new towers have been switched on, closing most of the wireless gaps between Prince Rupert and Prince George. And now the forecast on the north coast, a chance of showers this afternoon with a high of 4, highs around -14 with a chance of flurries in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a chance of flurries with a high of -3, highs from -2 to +2 and mainly cloudy in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, a chance of showers or flurries with a high of 4. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, showers this afternoon with highs around 7 degrees. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Rob. And thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on the CBC News app. That's cbc.ca/BC. And of course, we have a CBC Vancouver YouTube page. We are everywhere. Before we get to our next topic, friends and advocates are remembering beloved Vancouver artist and 2S LGBTQ+ advocate Joe Average. He died on Christmas Eve. He was 67. Average became known for helping change the conversation around HIV/AIDS awareness through his art. Here is a Loving Spoonful director, Lisa Martella, this morning reminiscing about Joe with Early Edition host Stephen Quinn.
Let's think about this way back in the 1980s.
Yeah.
People were affected by AIDS. You didn't want to touch somebody, hug somebody, even talk to somebody. I mean, Joe brought a face to the devastating disease, and he was able to resonate with people and give them some hope. And that's what people need, is hope.
It's, given what he was going through, his art is exactly the opposite. I mean, it's just full of joy and life and color, and it's so incredibly vital. Yeah. Tell me about how he, came up with that, why he did that.
Well, I think that's just Joe. I think that's where he came to be, right? That's where his purpose led him, and being able to share that and give hope to people. And that's through artistic expression and colorfulness and vibrancy. And life can be vibrant again, even after being diagnosed, even after being told you only have 6 months to live, right? So such an incredible and powerful story. I knew Joe as someone who always was, he had a great sense of humor, actually. And he was a lot of fun. Him and I hung out socially here and there, and just incredible to know Joe is the person, Joe is the artist, Joe is the philanthropist.
Well, 'tis the season. As we look back on 2024, we may often remember any highs and lows. Sometimes it's what we didn't achieve, maybe a promotion at work, maybe you were hoping to lose some weight and it didn't happen fully, maybe you didn't find a new hobby. That's where the new year offers all sorts of possibilities for change. We want to hear from you now. Do you have goals for the new year? And if so, how do you plan to achieve them? What are those goals? What are your challenges this year? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950 or across our great big province. In Metro Vancouver, the number is 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. Please be hands-free or pulled over if you're driving. You can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Here with some advice and some guidance, we're joined by Kira Lynne, life coach and counselor. Kira, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm pleased to be here.
So, is this common that people get reflective this time of year? Like, when does your phone start ringing?
My phone starts ringing last couple weeks in December. People are really wanting to make changes, and then sort of want to kick it up into high gear. I've had a lot of people contacting me this week alone.
Really?
Yeah.
And what's the common thread?
common thread is, it's time to do something different. Last year wasn't working. Want to step into a better place. And a lot of people are recognizing that they need a little bit of help and support to do that.
Well, certainly there are lots of resources online, but for people who don't know where to look, what is it that you offer that can help them?
Yeah, so as a coach, what I do is I help people, first of all, define their goals. What do they really want? Because a lot of people come in with ideas and think, oh yeah, I know what I want. But when we actually start to look into it more deeply, maybe it's not what they actually want. So we work first to clarify what it is you're looking for and why do you want that? What is it going to bring to your life? And then slowly once those are set, we break things down into smaller objectives, work through them week to week. And I'm there to help them be accountable, to stay on track, but also to overcome obstacles, because we're always going to encounter some sort of obstacle when we set a goal. So I'm there to help them work through that and be able to achieve their goals more and more on their own, because they'll then know how to overcome the obstacles.
What are the most common, are there 3 to 5 most common goals that you are hearing from people this time of year heading into 2025?
Get healthy,
There's a new one.
Yeah, which is very vague, and one that I really like to hone in on with clients. And what does that mean to you specifically? What would it look like? What would be different in your life if you were healthy? Also, a lot of career stuff comes up at this time of year. Get healthy, career, and relationships, whether it's improving relationships or finding a relationship.
Those are still, career and relationships are still very broad.
Yes, they are.
So you talked about breaking these things down. Let's take one of them. Let's take career. If somebody says, I want to earn more money or get a promotion, obviously it depends on their circumstance, but where do you start, for example, on career?
Where I start is very wide and more general, and then we come in towards the middle. So I start with, what purpose does your career need to serve at this time in your life? What are you wanting from your career? How would you like to evolve? Do you even know how you'd like it to evolve? Is the purpose simply to earn more money, or is there more to this? I also really look at values and what are your career values. Let's identify what's most important to you in your career, whether that's integrity, honesty, support, and then making sure that any choices are aligned with those values going forward. I also like to look at what feelings would you like to have around your career? Do you want to enjoy going to your job every day? Do you want to feel challenged, enthusiastic, or do you want to feel more supported by a team? And so using those emotions that we're looking for in work, then we also have another guidepost as to, am I making the right choice? Am I moving in the right direction? Is this bringing me more of the emotions that I want? There
can be pressure, I don't know if that's correct, if that's the right term, for people to improve, get better. Certainly, I think most of us have thought about setting a goal for the new year and perhaps didn't reach it. What about that societal pressure? Do you think that still exists?
In terms of New Year's goals?
New Year's goals, but generally, in particularly, we're talking about this time of year, get healthy, career, relationships, a lot of that, because it's the new year, it feels like, okay, maybe this is time for a reset. Is it a fair pressure, do you think?
I think it's fair, particularly because a lot of companies market that new year, new you, and they're trying to sell products, and companies that try and sell products that include fitness or dieting will appeal to the shame we have about ourselves and our bodies. So they'll, ramp
Negative
that up
reinforcement
and say,
a bit.
yeah, you need this.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a big piece of it, is we're hearing these messages that we're not good enough, our body's not good enough, we're not healthy enough. Whether that's true or not, we will buy into it. And I think there's a lot of pressure there.
Do you have a goal for yourself this year? What do you plan to achieve? How do you plan to achieve it? Do you have a plan? We'd love to hear from you now. Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950. Our number in Metro Vancouver is 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. And our guest today is Kira Lynne. She's a life coach and counselor. What about unrealistic goals? How do you manage people's expectations for, I mean, the classic one, we were talking about this before we came on the show, getting healthy. I'm going to hit the gym 5 days a week, and you run A, into the crowds at the gym, and B, by February, it's just not worth it.
Yeah. And that's such a common one, the gym goal. And I'd like to take a step back here and talk about, okay, first of all, do you enjoy the gym? Why are you going to the gym? And what is it that you're really looking for? There are two kinds of goals. There are push goals and pull goals. And push goals are the sort of goals that you really need to push yourself to go and do. For example, if I don't enjoy going to the gym, I'm gonna have to push myself I'm gonna drag myself to the gym. I'm not gonna enjoy it. Afterwards, I'll probably feel good, but then think, oh my God, I have to do this all over again tomorrow.
Yep.
And so that's a thing to keep your eye out for, like a bit of a red flag. We wanna try and create goals around pull goals. So let's say instead, I mean, personally, I love to ride my bike, and I've recently got an electric bike, and that pulls me. I'm excited. As soon as it stops raining, I'm out on my bike, and I'm riding around because I really enjoy it. I have some clients that enjoy dancing, so rather than going to the gym, they've signed up for dance classes because those pull them. They're excited to go. They have fun, and then they're excited to go again. And so when we talk about getting healthy, I like to look at how can we do that in a way that appeals to us, that's fun, rather than forcing ourselves or pushing ourselves to do something that we're not going to be able to maintain.
And within that, even if you find, for example, people that like to go to the gym, that think, this is going to be great, I'm enjoying the atmosphere, there's a bit of camaraderie, but sometimes they set that bar too high and they say, okay, well, it's 5 days a week, and suddenly, oh, I can't do that.
Yeah.
How do you manage expectations?
Well, what I like to do, if a client comes in and says, I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week. And I say, okay, how many times have you been going so far? And they'll say, well, I haven't been going. I say, is it realistic for you, if you imagine your next coming week, to see yourself going to the gym 5 days? Where will you fit that in your schedule? Will you have enough energy? And when I start to break it down and ask those questions, people generally tend to realize like, oh, yeah, I mean, realistically, 5 isn't going to happen. So I tend to actually talk people down from their goals a lot because it's important to have goals that are achievable. That's how we gain our confidence. And if we're setting a lot of goals for ourselves that we can't achieve, we're going to lose confidence. We might stop trying to go for goals. So I like to start small, have them achieve some things that they can feel good about, and then adding on to that. So I like to ramp people back 5 days a week. Usually when that happens, realistically, they're willing to commit to 2 days a week. And that's where we start, which is great because then we can build that up if it's working.
And from the clients and the people that you work with, how successful have they been from moving from 2 days a week to more?
They have been successful, but they never actually move to the 5 days because it becomes apparent that it's not what they really want.
Right.
Yeah, and often they think they need 5, but going 2 or 3 times feels good, and it's good enough, and they're pleased with that.
Is there any danger? Actually, before I ask this question, let's go to our first caller here. Garrett is joining us from Sechelt. Garrett, thanks for calling. I understand you just moved to Edmonton. What prompted that?
Hello?
Hi, Garrett. You're on. Any goals for this year?
Yeah, I just moved to Edmonton in the Army, and I'm 18, and I only have like Army friends. And my goal is to make more friends outside of the Army in Edmonton. It's kind of isolating, so I was just wondering, like, that's my goal, I guess.
Have you done anything to put yourself out there, meet other people?
Yeah, I've gone to like a jiu-jitsu lesson, but yeah, that's about it. And I've tried to go to some bars, but it's not really, I don't know.
Not your scene right now?
No. There's a bar on base too, and it's way better than the ones in town.
If you've ever been to an Army watering hole, yes, they are quite fun. And Garrett, thank you for your service as well. What do you think of Garrett's goal there, Kira?
Well, yeah, thanks for calling in, Garrett. I think friends are an important part of our lives, and it can be hard sometimes to make friends and meet friends and know where to meet new people, especially if you've moved to a new city, depending on the community, how welcome they are. One of the things I found that the people I've worked with who are most successful at making new friends is joining groups. Lots of groups. So there's a website called Meetup. I don't know if you're familiar with this one, but I've worked with a lot of people who've met a lot of great friends in Meetup groups. It's a website. They have groups for absolutely everything. There's groups for games, groups for hockey interests, groups for languages, anything you could think of, there's a group. And if there isn't one, you can create one yourself and start your own community. And so a lot of people like checking out these meetup groups and just going and meeting various people and finding the group that feels good and where they can meet friends. That's been a really positive. A lot of people I know too, and I don't know if this is up your alley, but Toastmasters is also a great way to get out there, meet people. And out of fairness, a lot of this can take some courage and bravery to step out there and step out of your comfort zone and do that. And you don't have to do it all at once. Just starting to try new things, talking to different people as you're out and about, just slowly, again, working your way through some ideas.
That can be difficult, right? Particularly when, Garrett moving, from Seashell to Edmonton, that's a distance.
Yeah.
And trying to find somebody, thankfully he has a community in the Army, but wants to expand that. It can be difficult, particularly if somebody wants to call themselves introverted, but even those who are extroverted, it can be hard to, quote, put yourself out there, right?
It can be hard to put yourself out there, out of fairness. And I think that's where we need some self-compassion and say, it isn't easy. And it takes some persistence. And I think a lot of people too, they'll meet someone new, they'll think, oh yeah, I'd like to be friends with this person, go out once, and then they don't hear from the other person, so they give up. So I think a lot of it is persistence and saying, hey, let's do this again, or really being active in the friendship, because we do need to work to create and maintain friendships.
I think we have another call on the line. Cheryl, if I'm pronouncing this right, is joining us from Richmond. Cheryl, do you have any goals for 2025?
Yeah, hi, it's Cheryl.
Cheryl, my apologies.
Yeah, and thank you for this program. It's amazing. I love everything you guys do on CBC. And big goal, I'm in a band called Stone Poets, and we're also in a collective group called Peacenik Collective. And so we just released a new single called Back to Love. And the goal is to start a peace movement with our music. Lofty goal, right?
Yeah,
Very lofty goal. But I think that, we're in a kind of a bit of a predicament right now. We're also divided. Everyone in the world is just, you see what's going on in the media. It's crazy. So we want to bring people back together, and our single Back to Love, I think, is going to be a really great message for the new year for people. They can find us on Spotify and peacenikcollective.com. And that's the goal.
Great. Cheryl, if I can ask you, well, we still have you on the line. What prompted you to get into music?
Oh my God, that's such a big loaded question. Many years ago, just starting in school plays and things like that. So it goes way back. But I think right now with Stone Poets and Peacenik Collective, the goal is with music to try and bring people together in a community spirit, and that's what we're doing. Right.
Cheryl, we appreciate your call, and all the best with Peacenik Collective. That's great. Kira Lynne, what do you make of what Cheryl was saying there?
Well, I think putting positive intentions out is always a really wonderful approach. I like the idea of that and of creating what it is that you want more of. Yeah.
And the idea, and particularly around music, on Meetup, there has to be a whole bunch of musicians or people wanting to learn, et cetera, where they can go, oh, okay, you can meet up with other people. Have you noticed that? People wanting to get into performing arts or music, who you deal with?
Absolutely, yes. I have one client in particular. She has just graduated from a music program at university, and she's making all kinds of connections, some through Meetup, creating bands, playing different kinds of music. And it's been a really wonderful way for her to connect with other people.
Oh, fabulous. Sheena emails us to say, I'm going to learn hula and belly dance by finding free online lessons. This way I can fit it into any time that works for me, and it won't cost me money. Moving to music is the most effective way to raise your mood. Very good advice there, Sheena. And we talked about that with getting healthy. I'd like to touch on relationships. Certainly, there may be some pressure that people feel if they're not with a partner or partners around New Year's Eve, and are you going to be spending it alone? Are you going to be spending with friends, that kind of thing? What sort of challenges do people run into when it comes to relationships that you've heard, Kira?
I've been thinking lately more about people who are in relationships and struggling. But when it comes to meeting people, again, out of fairness, we're living in a difficult time to meet people. I hear this constant sort of like this dating app fatigue that, if you want to meet someone, you go on the apps because that's sort of what everyone does, but nobody seems to like it. And I hear endless complaints about that. So yeah, it's not easy. And I've been sort of pondering again. Well, I often go through clients brainstorming different ways to meet people outside of the apps and encourage them to try different ways, not just swiping, but to actually get out there and do things and meet people. So becoming more involved, again, I like sort of diversifying, what you're doing and trying different things and being persistent.
What about for those who may not be trying something new, but want to stop doing something that they're perhaps overindulging in, whether it's eating, whether it's drinking, sedentary lifestyle, things that they feel are just not, they recognize perhaps that are not good for them? How do you break a pattern like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when there's a behavior that you'd like to stop, generally that behavior is meeting a need that we have, whether it's calming us from being stressed, whether it's helping us if we're feeling lonely, it's filling a hole. And so we can't just stop that behavior and expect to be fine. We need to find something to replace that behavior with, because if we take it out, we're just going to go right back to it. So we need to deal with the underlying issue, like the loneliness or the stress, and taking care of that. And eventually, when we start to focus more on the underlying issue, the behavior tends to dissolve. And so I find it helpful not to put so much emphasis on the behavior and to have some, again, compassion for the behavior because it's helping us somehow. But, what is more involved and how are you going to replace it and what's underneath it?
At what point do you help people realize that whatever they're doing has crossed the line from being a challenge into a real problem, whether it's drug or alcohol dependency, that kind of thing? At what point do you say, you know what, you need some more professional help than you can provide?
Yeah, that's really on a case-by-case basis. Generally, people know if they're open when I ask questions, how much is this interfering with your life? Is what we're doing helping? If what we're doing isn't helping, then they'll need perhaps to go to someone who's more specialized in the area in which they're struggling or to someone who's more, a psychiatrist who, when they need more help than I can provide. Because I don't diagnose, I don't prescribe, so there's a limit to what I do. And so there are various areas in which, if it's out of the scope of my practice, I will suggest to them to get additional help or, help them recognize that maybe this is bigger than what they initially thought.
And are people generally receptive to that information?
I would say most people are. If they're already coming to see me, they're open, they're wanting to change, yes.
That's a good sign.
Yeah.
Zoe writes us, for Garrett and others to meet like-minded folks and do some good, find a nonprofit or community group and volunteer. You find like-minded people without the nerves. Zoe, good advice. I see you nodding there, Kira. What is it about volunteering that you like?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because you're meeting people with the same interests. They're wanting to help. And you're coming together over a shared goal together, which can really be bonding experience.
If is there something to support? And I want to go back to relationships for a moment. What is it the advice that you offer to people, to support your significant other, or whether it's children, or helping others who want to achieve a goal that may be different from yours? If you are with a partner that wants to lose the weight or wants to eat better, and you're in a different goal place, how do you make sure that they can both stay on track and support each other?
Well, I always like to say, be curious, especially if you don't disagree with your partner's goal or you're not on board. Be curious about their experience and try to understand it from the context of their life rather than your own. And curiosity can really help with that. Not taking it to mean anything about you, but rather this is something that they would like as a separate person from you. And again, communication being so important, and it's a word we throw around so much, but when we actually come down to it, a lot of people don't know what they mean when they say better communication. But sometimes it needs to be very specific. So actually asking your partner, what can I do to help you achieve your goal? And if they say, well, just support me, then we want to find out a little more.
Yeah.
When you say support me, do you mean wake up with you at 6 a.m. to make sure you're out of bed? Do you mean giving you a high five after the gym? What do you mean when you say support me? Because I think a lot gets missed in the interpretation of words like that.
Is there, and are people generally receptive to wanting to help them, but also realizing that for others, they're not mind readers and they don't want to overly try to interpret things? It's easier to just have somebody say, here's what I'm looking for?
So that varies, right? I think in a lot of relationships, we think, oh, my partner, they should know how I feel. They should know what I want. They should anticipate my needs before I voice them. But we know that's not true. And while it may not, it feels different when we need to ask for our needs to be met, it is still very important that our partner know what we need and vice versa. And sometimes that requires spelling it out. Yeah.
Just in the brief time we have left, Kira, and we appreciate your time. Somebody listening is thinking, I want to start somewhere. What should they do? Should they write it down? What's the first thing to do?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of making a plan. Right?
And a list?
A list. Make a plan and write it down.
Yep.
You know, for example, if you are going to go to do some sort of exercise, whether you're hula hooping or going to the gym, write it down and say, what days of the week am I going to do it? What time of day am I going to do it? How long am I going to do it for? Be really specific. Write your plan down. I'm a fan of the SMART goals, so specific, measurable, so you know if you've been able to do it. Attainable, you know, realistic, and time-bound. You know, what is your timeline for that?
Could you repeat that? SMART.
SMART. Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound.
Time-bound.
Yeah.
That can be tough, right? Because if you don't have it within a certain period of time, it can disappear, right?
Yeah, and we want to make sure, you know, it's going to fit in a time frame that works for us. You know, if we're training for a marathon, we clearly have the timeline for that. But if it's something more, it's less of a deadline, we want to maybe sort of create a bit of, I wouldn't say pressure, but a timeline.
Very good. Yeah. Kira Lynne, life coach and counselor, we appreciate your time and your expertise. All the best in 2025.
Thank you so much.
And that's it for our show. Thank you for calling in and joining the discussion and emailing us. You can also always email us, bctoday@cbc.ca.